Good morning, guys. I'm back out on the training ground again today, and I've been doing a lot of gear videos kind of on my channel, and that's just to kind of get a baseline laid out. But really what I want to get into is more skills-based videos, and that's what I'm going to do today. I guess first off, before I get into that, I just want to do a quick thank you to everybody for subscribing. This morning I hit my 1,000th subscriber mark, which is kind of a benchmark if you have a YouTube channel. So I appreciate everybody for subscribing and commenting and taking part in the channel over the last year and helping it grow. I really do appreciate it very much, and thank you all. And so today, with that being said, today I'm out on one of my land nav courses. Now, land navigation, or the ability to navigate to get yourself where you need to go cross country, is what I would consider a fundamental fieldcraft skill. There's other fundamental fieldcraft skills as well, but if you can't get from point A to point B, it doesn't matter how good of a shelter or how good of a fire or how good you hunt or shoot or so on. You know, if you can't navigate, especially without the use of electronics, you know, you're just lost all the time, right? And so it's a skill that I focus heavily on during my fieldcraft course. Pretty much land navigation gets hit very hard, and most of my students leave here, you know, after 3.5 days of class with a higher level of land navigation ability than most of the professional infantrymen that I've ever seen. And I can say that because I was a professional infantryman, and I was actually very good among my peers at land navigation when I was in the Marines. And then I got out of the Marines and continued to hone my skills and learn more. And so, you know, I'm a much better land navigator than I was back then, and I was better than most back then. So, not better than all. There were certainly people better than me, but I can confidently say that when people leave here, they're doing things that we never did, okay? And they're doing it at a pretty good professional level. And so what I want to do is take you guys through kind of the initial first phase of the land navigation that I teach here, because I'm sure lots of you have heard the methodology, you know, crawl, walk, run, and that's very important with land navigation, as with most skills. And so this would be the crawl phase, and don't let that confuse you. Don't automatically dismiss it as unimportant, because this foundation creates the success later that my students have. And so I want to kind of just take you through that. So when I'm out here teaching land navigation to the students, I focus on a few different areas, and I kind of break it into multiple skill areas. You know, that's the old saying, right? An elephant's easy to eat one bite at a time, right? And so I break it into a few areas. One is compass use, okay? I treat the compass just like I do a rifle, all right? Mastering shooting a rifle is no different than mastering shooting a compass. There's very good technique and there's very bad technique. And if you use good technique, you'll have good results, right? And so I want my students to be as skilled with their compass as they are with their rifle. Next, we're going to add in other tools like maps and protractors. And we're going to learn how to plot grids, and then how to find those grids, and then also how to use the map to do other land navigation skills, okay? And then lastly, what happens if you don't have a compass or a map? We talk about methods for that, like different means of solar compasses, different celestial navigation techniques, okay? And so those are kind of the general skill areas, so that way you can navigate with tools, without tools, with a map, without a map. Now notice nowhere in that mixture did I say anything about a GPS or any other electronic means of navigation. Now I'm not saying you should ignore those means. They're great tools, they're great enablers, but we shouldn't be dependent on them. And having these core skills down first and then adding in the electronic means later will get you great benefits. All right, so let's talk about the compass that I recommend. It's the Suunto MC2. You can use either global or the US GS version. Let's talk about where I keep it first before we get too detailed. Get these curls out. Notice that I have my compass dummy corded. All right, it's tied to a string that's looped around my belt, not through a belt loop, okay? Belt loops are just little sewn on pieces of fabric that can rip easily. Now these ones are pretty substantial compared to most pants, but still I wouldn't trust it. I'd much rather trust this nice big piece of webbing here. All right, so I have my dummy cord hooked around my belt, okay? And I use these little, trying to think of the brand, just little S-beaners to hold it on so that I can take it on and off later. And that's kind of important. Notice where I keep it. I keep it right here, front left pocket, because I want to be able to get to my compass easily and quickly, because the easier I can get to it, the more I'm going to be likely to use it. All right, and that's important because I see guys put their compasses and they've got them like buried and stuff, or they'll have it in their backpack or something. I guarantee I'm going to use my compass more than they are, because they're going to have to stop, tear it out, and as people get tired and, you know, exhausted from hiking around, they get lazy. Not, you know, not a character flaw, it's just fact of the matter is their brain goes into energy conservation mode and they're looking for shortcuts. And they may not even realize they're doing it. And so by keeping this compass right here, I'm likely to use it more, which means my land navigation is going to stay more accurate. Okay. Plus, where it's on my person, it's part of my line one gear, right? So if I lose all my other stuff, I still have a means to navigate on me. Okay. One thing I like about the MC2, kind of a side benefit, it's also a really good signal mirror. All right. We can signal with this thing. I've made a few modifications to mine. Probably the most obvious is this bright orange section of, it's just bright orange duct tape. This is important for signaling. You know, when we're working in a team, we use what's called a leapfrog method. And basically one person will be shooting the azimuth. The other person will actually go out and kind of be out there so that the guy shooting the azimuth can aim that person onto the azimuth and then leave him there. That way you guys can make little short jumps as you're land navigating. It really helps with your technique rather than just trying to cut a beeline through a bunch of bushes and hope you're staying on the azimuth. You can just see kind of back here against the trees, you know, if I'm the guy that's sent out, I can use this, and you can imagine, you know, when I'm back in the trees or in a bush trying to be the target for this guy shooting the azimuth, if I hold this up like this, it gives him something to see very easily instead of this camouflaged blob against a bush, right? I also keep, the Sunto MC2 has adjustable declination, and it comes with a small piece of metal. Kind of looks like a little flat blade screwdriver, because that's what it is. All right, and I keep that on my dummy cord as well. That way I can use it on my compass, and I'll explain what that's for later. Okay guys, so let's talk about the parts of the MC2 compass. So up here, this black piece is the lid, and this is the base down here, this clear part. All right, this is what they call a sighting mirror compass. It's a very accurate compass. It's easier to shoot accurately with this compass than it is a lensatic style compass because of its design. That's why I really like it. So let's talk about the parts of the lid real quick, okay? Now, up here at the top, you can see this V shape. All right, there's multiple sighting notches on this compass, and this is the top one. And there's also a photoluminescent bead that goes along with it. We have the actual sighting mirror itself, and I'll see if I can get it on camera. There's kind of a line running through the center of that lines up with that sighting notch. All right, down here we've got this lower sighting window, and in the center of it there's also a sighting notch with a photoluminescent bead. That's going to be the one you use most of the time, okay? So that's the inside part of the lid. On the outside, of course, I talked about my bright orange panel there. You know, this is also great, so if you drop your compass, I've found other people's compasses before, and because they didn't have their stuff dummy corded. And so that's another reason, you know, hopefully the thing lands face up, and you know, you can find it easier. Whoa, really? There's a bird that came and landed right on top of this tree. He's irritated that I'm here, I think, but he's gonna have to just get over it, or he's gonna meet my 30-30. Yeah, get on out of here. Okay, so on the side we've got different scales, and this is for determining the slope, the degree of slope with a topo map. Basically, the tighter these lines are, the tighter the steeper the slope is. I don't use these a whole lot. You would just lay them on your topo map, and whatever lines up close, that's the slope. Okay. Down here we've got, on the base, we've got our bezel ring marked in degrees. Make sure when you buy one of these compasses, you get one in degrees. They do sell a version, I believe, still in mils. Do not get that one. All right, get the degrees. And it's 360 degrees. All right, within the bezel, there's the actual compass needle. All right, the red part of the needle always points north, to magnetic north, that is, and it has that white panel on there that's photoluminescent. Okay, and then within this window, we've got what we call the barn. I'm just going to turn it so you can see it easier. All right, or the shed, and that red outline there is the shed, and that's going to be important later. There's actually a corresponding black one as well. Okay, now you notice directly opposite of the red needle is the black needle. There's nothing special about the black needle. It's not magnetic or anything, but it does always point the opposite direction of the red needle, obviously, so that's important. Okay, going further down here we've got another photoluminescent marker, and then we've got this bright red triangle. That's going to be important when we're using this compass in conjunction with a map. And then of course down here is where my dummy cord ties on, just in a lark's head knot. Now you'll notice there's a small magnifier here. You can use that, you know, to magnify fine details on maps. And then up here is a small bubble level. Now this is not part, this doesn't come with an MC2 compass normally. This is something that I added so that, because it's important when you're shooting an azimuth, you want to make sure your compass is as level as possible. And so I just put this tiny bubble level on. I drilled a hole through the back and just epoxied this on a few years back. So the back of the compass, about the only thing important back here, you know, it's got a few rubber feet, so when you set it on a map, it stays stable. But there's this black ring, okay? And within this black ring, there's a small brass screw. See if you guys can see that or not. Yeah, right there. And that's how we adjust our magnetic declination, which is important when you're using maps. Okay, which I should bring up. The bottom half of this circle is the magnetic declination scale. And so you want to make sure that is set to 0. Like it is right there. You can see the black shed is on 0 there. Hopefully you can see that anyways. And you should be able to see that is on 0. And so you want to keep that on 0 unless you're using a map. All right, not all land navigation has to be done with a corresponding map. You can actually make your own maps, and that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today. And so that's pretty much all the parts of the Suunto MC2. Next, I'll talk about how you use the thing. Okay guys, so the next piece of gear real quick that you're going to want to have is a small notepad. I like these little Right in the Rain spiral bound notepads. They're really handy. And I've just dummy corded a small mechanical pencil to it, because these two, you're going to be using them often, just like your compass. And so you're going to want to write down 3 things. Basically what we're creating here is kind of a logbook of our land navigation. We've got our azimuth, our pace count, and then our notes, any unique things. And as we're land navigating, we're just going to use this to keep track of our route. And this is going to be especially important if we want to create a map of our route later. This is basically the data for that map. Little turtle thought he'd pop up and say hi. See what we're up to today. Okay guys, hopefully the wind's not too bad up here. I wanted to talk about pace count real quick. So pace count is like your odometer. It's basically how when you're doing land navigation. It's how you keep track of the distance you've traveled, okay? And so basically what you want to do is figure out your pace count, because it's unique to each person. And not only that, depending on what equipment that person's carrying, what the weather conditions are, and what the terrain are, can all affect their pace count as well. You know, if you're going uphill, that's gonna take more paces or steps than it would if you're walking on flat ground. If you're carrying a heavy load, that's probably gonna take more paces than if you're carrying a lighter load. And so it's something, each one of us has our own kind of unique pace count. After you do this enough, you can usually start combining them and averaging them to get a pretty rough, you know, I shouldn't say pretty rough, pretty good estimate on what your general pace count's going to be over a certain amount of distance. And so, like, for me, I use 64, but I've just kind of been averaging for years and years and years, and I just modify that number. Sometimes it's been a little more, sometimes it's a little less, but in general, I know that if I assume my pace count's 64, whether I'm going uphill, downhill, or on a flat, you know, over the course of a route, I usually come out pretty dang close. So to start off with, you always get your flat pace count first. So you're going to want to find an area that's 100 meters long and it's flat, okay? And I know I'm in America and we use yards, but all of your maps, the grids are printed in meters, and so we want to use the meters. You know, I like to come out in an area that's actually realistic. You know, you could go to like a soccer field or a football field or whatever, but if that's not realistic to what you're going to be actually working in, it's going to affect your pace count. So I like to come out here. You know, the ground, I'm on a fairly level piece of ground right now, but it's not smooth. There's bushes and little divots and stuff in the ground. So to get your pace count, basically you'll start at the very beginning of your 100 meters, and you want to start with your right foot. So you're going to take a step and you're just going to walk naturally, and you're going to count every time your left foot hits the ground. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4. And you're going to keep going until you hit that 100 meter line, and then you're going to write that number down. Let's say it's 65. All right, then you're going to turn right back around and you're going to do the same thing again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on until you hit the far 100 meter line. All right, and then you're going to write that number down. Let's say it's 63. Next, you're going to add those two numbers together and divide by 2 to get an average, and that's going to be your flat pace count. So if I had 65 on the first run and 63 on the next, that's going to give me 64. All right, so next, what you're going to want to do after you've got your flat pace count, you're going to want to get an uphill and a downhill. And of course, this is going to be with your gear on and stuff. And if you can go out into an area that's more realistic, of course, it's going to be better. Now, I do mine a little bit different than maybe what you might think you should do, especially if you've had land nav training before. What I'll actually do, and you can see over on this hillside, coming up in this little saddle and running all the way down over here, I've marked off a 200 meter long stretch rather than just doing 100 meters. And so I'll have students go uphill for 200 meters and turn around and go downhill for 200 meters. And I've found that gives a much more accurate representation than just 100 meters. Because I want to induce some stress when they're getting their pace counts, and by making them go 200 meters uphill, that really gets the heart rate going, and kind of, you know, some people might not be fully stressed, so to speak, at 100 meters, but usually by the time they hit 200 meters, you know, their heart's pumping and, you know, they're in full cardio mode by then. And so I want to get that captured in their pace count. And so I'll have them go uphill and write that number down, and then I'll have them go downhill, write that number down, and then I'll have them do it again. You know, and so doing it back to back, once again, just introduces a little more stress, because you're not going to land nav for 200 meters and be done, you know. And so doing it twice, once again, just helps get those accurate numbers. You know, they're sweating, their heart's beating, they're breathing hard, and so it just helps to get the more accurate pace count. And so they'll do both of those, and then add them together and divide by 4 because they've covered 400 meters, right? They went uphill 200 meters, then they went uphill again 200 meters. So they'll take their uphill pace counts, add them together, divide by 4, and that'll give them a 100-meter uphill pace count, and they'll do the same on the downhill. Okay, guys, like I said, I pretty much consider using a compass to be very similar to using a rifle or firearm, we'll say. And so using proper technique with the compass, just like with a rifle, is very important. Okay, so when we're shooting our azimuths, we want to be, standing vertical, fairly, straight up. We want our head straight up. We don't want to be like hunched way down or nothing. Just a comfortable position, similar to like you're shooting a pistol, okay? We're just going to open this sighting mirror, going to open up the lid, and we're going to put it out at arm's length. We want basically the distance from our eye to the distance to these sighting notches to be as long as possible without, overstraining our arms or anything like that. Just nice, comfortable arm's length, okay? Because as I move this closer, I mean, if you take your fingers and make a V, look at the amount of distance that's covered by that V at arm's length versus up close, okay? You can get a lot finer just by extending that distance. And that's why I think this type of compass is much more accurate than like the military lensatic compass. The military compasses, you shoot from back here. Well, that V notch, or on those compasses, that sighting wire on the lensatic covers a much larger area than if you get it out at distance, okay? So these compasses were designed to be held at arm's length, okay? So that's how you want to do it. There is an alternative method. You can just hold it like this to get a quick, if you're just looking to get a quick estimate, I would say you can do this. But ultimately, if you want as much accuracy out of your compass as you can, you want to hold it out like this, okay? Up at eye level, looking through either the lower sighting notch or the upper sighting notch to get your azimuth. Okay, guys, while we're talking about shooting azimuths, we're talking about using our upper and lower sight notches on our compass. But what happens if you're up on, say, a very large hill and you need to shoot an azimuth going down the hill? If I hold this compass out level, my upper sighting notch is up in the sky and my lower sighting notch isn't pointed at anything down here that I need to pick for a landmark. It does me no good to pick a landmark way on the other side of the valley because I'm probably not going to be able to see that as I'm crossing the valley, okay? Up here I have an awesome line of sight, but if I get down there, it's going to be obscured. So I need to pick something down there. Now, if I hold my compass like this, it does me no good because the compass isn't working correctly at that point. And so what I've found that works pretty good is you can unhook your dummy cord and then just find a small weighted object like a rock or this piece of wood, for example. And we're just going to use a lark's head knot and attach this piece of wood to our dummy cord. And now what that allows me to do is I can still hold my compass level properly to shoot the correct azimuth. But if I can get this plumb bob to steady, I now have a vertical string shooting a pretty approximate azimuth, depending on how steady you can hold it, down into that valley. It's not perfect. You're going to want to make sure that you pick an object pretty close. Don't pick anything real far away. Okay, guys, so our first azimuth is 050. So let's talk about how we're going to use our compass and shoot this azimuth. Okay. So I put my notepad away. And then I get my compass out. All right. So what I teach students to do, open up their compass all the way. Okay. Now right here, there's an indicator, and it's clear, but it's a little triangle. And I always teach my students to hold it up to the sky because that backlight helps that triangle appear much easier. All right, and so we're going to go along this white outer ring, and we're going to find 50. Well, 50 is not marked, but I have 40 and 60, and then I've got a tick mark in between. So we're going to hold it up, and while looking at the sky, we're going to put that 50 right on the point of that triangle. So See if I can zoom in a little for you guys. There we go. Okay, you see that? All right, so now we've set the azimuth to 50. Okay, now the beauty of this compass is we now take it, hold it level, and we're going to fold this sighting mirror back. All right, we're going to keep folding it back until we can see in its reflection that red shed that I talked about. Okay. And now we're just going to turn our compass and we're going to put that red needle in the shed. And the ditty goes, put the red in the shed, right? And then we're going to look through while that red needle's in the shed, and we're going to look through our sighting notch. And we're going to find an object in the distance. And I'm trying to look through and look through the camera at the same time. Get it a little straighter for you guys. All right, hopefully you can see that. We're going to pick an object in the distance that's in that sighting notch. Okay. And it looked to me like, focus here, it was pointing just to the right of this tree here. All right. And so that's our azimuth, and that's the direction we need to head. And so when I'm shooting an azimuth, and I've got this set up, I want to pick an object in the distance, like a landmark, a rock, a tree, something like that. And like I said, when we're doing leapfrog with a partner, that's when the partner would go out and we can line him up on azimuth, you know, so that way we have him as well. Okay. And so like I said, it looks to me like our azimuth was pointing just to the right edge, right about here. Okay. And I don't know if I captured that very good on camera. It seems like the angles are a little awkward, trying to line up through the compass with the camera, but that's the direction that it's headed. Okay. So now that we know what direction we need to head, I'm going to head towards the right side of that pine tree and keep going in that direction. And I'm going to keep track of every time my left foot hits the ground, and that's going to be my pace count. Now, we can always write down our pace count whenever we want. We don't have to wait until we find the next point. And so I might write down the paces to that pine tree, for example. And then from that pine tree to the next small notable feature. It could be anything. It could be a dead tree. It could be a large rock. It could be a dead animal. Whatever it is, you just write it down, because that builds a record of where you've been. So that way, if you have to backtrack, you can find your way back easily, or later you can use that information to build a map. Okay guys, so I've made it to the right side of that small pine tree, so I think I'm going to add that note into my little land nav log here. So I've got azimuth 050, pace count. My pace count from the start to here is only 29 paces so far. And I'll just put small pine in the notes section, okay? And then from here, I'm going to start my pace count over. I'm not going to pick back up at 29. I'll just start over. Seems to me, at least the way it is for me, I like to keep the numbers small, easier to remember for my brain, you know? So next, I'm just going to get up here, and I'll get on this right side of this pine tree. I'll get my compass out, and I'll reshoot the azimuth. Okay guys, so I'm up on the right side of that pine tree, kind of on the back side of it now. And what I need to do is reshoot my azimuth, okay? So I'm looking in the general direction of that azimuth, and I'm trying to stand basically exactly where, you know, like I said, the right side of the pine tree, not dead center, not the left side. I want to be kind of on that same side that when I first sighted in on the pine tree at the initial start, you know, it was aiming at the right edge. I want to be on that right edge, okay? And so I've still got my azimuth dialed. I'm going to double check my azimuth. Looks like it did get bumped just a hair. Put that back to 50. All right, there it's at 50. And I'm gonna go ahead and reshoot the azimuth. All right, guys, so we've made it to the next point. We can see the cow tag on the tree, so we know it's the right spot, and that's giving us the azimuth to the next point. So I'm going to go ahead and write down my pace count on my land nav log. Then I'll write down the new pace count underneath that. Okay guys, I want to introduce another tool for your toolbox. So we're learning how to use the compass. We're learning how to shoot a forward azimuth. All right, that's what we've been doing. We shot a forward azimuth to get to where we're at now. What if we need to go backwards? Okay, let's talk about what's called a back azimuth. Now, you can use a back azimuth, of course, to backtrack to where you've came from. You can also use it in conjunction with a map for doing different skills on the map that we'll talk about in a future video. But real quick, let's just talk about how to figure out our back azimuth. So if you recall, our forward azimuth was 050. Okay, and let's see, I was messing with that, but so our forward azimuth was 050. All right, so your back azimuth is always 180 degrees opposite of your forward azimuth. Okay, so a general rule of thumb is that if your forward azimuth is less than 180 degrees, you add 180. And if it's more than 180 degrees, you subtract 180. Now, that's how I learned it back in the day when I was using a lensatic compass. And we can do math, and math is fun, and everybody likes math, especially when they're tired and wet and cold. Or a beautiful thing on this MC2 is they give us this back azimuth indicator down here. That'll just, all you got to do is look. So we know if our forward azimuth is 50, we look here, it's 230. You know, I've literally seen students argue with each other over what their back azimuths are because they're tired, they're exhausted, and usually one guy's brain isn't working quite as good as it normally does, and he does his math wrong, gets confused. And so having this nice visual to look at, no math needed, no time hardly needed. You know, let's say I was working with somebody and they forgot their gloves back at point 1. I instantly know what my back azimuth is. I turn right around and shoot it, and we're good. And so to shoot a back azimuth, it depends. If we've left our original forward azimuth on, which is what I usually do, now we're going to put the black arrow in the shed instead of the red arrow. The red arrow would be our forward azimuth. The black arrow is our back azimuth. All right, black and back rhyme, so that's how I just kind of memorized it that way. All right, the other technique we can do, of course, is just dial 230, dial it as a forward azimuth now, and put the red in the shed. Okay, either way, both those will get us back to our starting point, back at that tree. Okay, this one would have been insanely hard to find. Not impossible, but a yellow tag on the side of a tree full of yellow leaves would have been interesting. Not impossible though. Okay guys, let's talk about small obstacles. Okay, so right now I'm headed up this hillside. My azimuth is pointing me to the right edge of this juniper right here. But you can see I've got this bush and quite a few other bushes that are basically right on my azimuth. I mean, what do I do? Do I just walk right through the middle of them? Yeah, you could. I mean, you're gonna run the risk of losing gear and wasting time, you know. And in the textbook, military land nav textbooks, they talk about doing a box offset, which I'll cover later, but that's time consuming. So what else can we do? I mean, do I really need to do a box offset for this little obstacle right here? Probably not. So right now, my pace count's at 30, okay? And what I'm going to do is basically I'm going to cut at like a roughly a 45-degree angle around that obstacle, okay? And all I'm going to do is I'm going to skip every other pace count while I'm doing it. So if I'm at 30 right now, go 31, skip, 32, skip, 33, skip, 34. Till I'm pretty much back online with my azimuth. Now, if we're doing leapfrog, that really works good because I'd have a guy back here still shooting the azimuth, and then I'd know that I'm still on. But from where I started on the other side over here to here is about 4 paces, I would say. And so just by kind of cutting a 45 around the obstacle and skipping every other pace count, you can pretty much stay on pace without getting way super technical just to go around a little. Okay guys, I'm about halfway through the course, and my current azimuth is directing me up this draw. Okay, the problem is I have all this brush in front of me, and it's gonna be pretty much impossible to maintain a pace count. And so there's gonna be times like this where, you know, you could do a box offset, but up the valley it's all choked with brush. The whole area is, so you're not gonna box offset around that. Pretty much at points like this, you're just going to have to either estimate it or use a laser rangefinder and shoot it across, okay? And that's not I know I talked about using techniques without batteries. You know, it's a valid technique if you can, but if not, you're just going to have to estimate, get across. And so what we're going to want to do here, we want to do this with a plan, you know? And so along my azimuth, I can spot in the distance I'm headed towards. Let's see if I can zoom in on it here. That bush right there is what my compass is aiming towards. Okay, now I know right behind that bush is kind of that slough in the hillside there. All right, and then if we come in closer though, it's hard to probably tell on camera, but considerably closer to us, maybe about halfway between us and that bush, are these bushes right here. Big fat finger. Alright. One on the right kind of looks like an F, roughly. And it's got that other tangled up one on the left side. And so what I'm going to do is first I'm going to estimate the distance to those. I'm going to say that's about 100 meters. And then I'm going to work on getting to this tree right here on the left. Center of the screen there, hit that small tree, and then I'll hit those smaller bushes there. And I know when I get there, that's about 100 meters away. And then from there, all I need to do is proceed on to that other bush, which I'll pick up my pace count probably at that point if I can. Okay guys, I'm just about ready to cross over. That was the tree that I said I was going to get to first. And you can tell why it would be important when you're working in a team to use that leapfrog technique, you know. This way you can shoot somebody through all this crap, get them on the other side, and then line them up and put them back on the azimuth so everybody knows which way to go. I'm out here by myself, so the technique I described of just kind of picking terrain features and landmarks and obvious points works well too. So I'm gonna go ahead and push through all this. You know, this is why long sleeves, gloves, clothing that doesn't snag easily is all important. Okay guys, so I just came through kind of this waist high, well, it's more like chest high, whatever those plants are, I don't know, really tall. It's not grass, but anyways, I came down this hillside right here. Now what I could have done is just cut a straight line right over to where I'm at. But instead I chose to zig over and then zag back. And what that does, because you're gonna create a trail no matter what when you go through stuff that tall. You know, you're gonna disturb the vegetation, break it over, and it's gonna create a trail. Now if you're worried about not creating as obvious of a trail, you can do kind of that zigzag like I said, And so that way anybody passing by, at least, it's going to be harder for them to pick up on that trail, as opposed to if we made a nice clean pass right through the middle of that. Okay, I made it through the green monster here. I stopped, kind of checked over my gear real quick, make sure nothing got pulled out of my pockets or, God forbid, got lost down in there. You can see why I put that bright orange tape on my compass now, I bet. And so, you know, luckily I don't have to move through a bunch of that stuff. But if you do, you know, doing routine and regular checks to make sure you didn't lose anything is a very good idea. As well as making sure everything's tied down. You know, when I've talked about my Line 2 gear, I've talked about how I don't like it any wider than I am. That's a major reason why right there. All that stuff that sticks out is going to snag and get hit. I mean, you're going to get hit anyways when you're pushing through this stuff, but if you've got items that stick out on the sides a lot, you know, they can get snagged pretty easily, either hanging you up or else having them ripped off your gear. I've seen M16 magazines somehow ejected from the rifles pushing through stuff like this. You just, you know, anything's possible, I guess. So anyways, I'm gonna keep moving on to that next point. Okay, I'm coming up on that little tree after the big tree. And then straight up ahead are those two bushes I was talking about. The one on the right that is kind of an F shape. Very poor F shape. Okay guys, I've made it to the bush. Now, I can see the tag. It's actually on that little tree right there. Kind of see it in the center of your screen there. That tag used to be on this tree until this tree got blown over, and I moved it up to that one. I know it's not in the exact spot that I shot my azimuth, but I teach all the students to keep their head on a swivel while they're out here. Because like I said, these compasses are only accurate to about 2.5 degrees. And so if you take your fingers and go like that, you can envision how the further out you go, the more that 2.5 degrees gets bigger. And so 1 degree is about 90 feet, if I remember right, at a mile. So 2.5 degrees is about 220 or so degrees. And so when you're out here doing this, these compasses are not lasers, and you may shoot an azimuth and go, oh, it's that exact bush right there. But if you get tunnel vision and get sucked in on that bush and don't pay attention to your surroundings, you're gonna miss that tag. And so I don't feel bad for moving it up there, you know, and who's to say that if they were out here shooting the azimuth that they might not have shot it right on that tree anyways. Okay guys, getting through the course here. Just came up through this saddle and down to this next point. Now, this one's kind of tricky because the tree's on a hillside. Now, ideally, when you're shooting an azimuth, you'd want your, your back up against this tree almost, because what that tag is saying is that the next point is 182 degrees from that tag. But that's going to be nearly impossible to do that. And so what works really good is I'm about 6-7 feet now away from the trunk of that tree out here where I can actually stand and work. Now when I shot that azimuth from this spot, basically the right edge of that tree was where my azimuth pointed. And we know that a line 182 degrees from that tree trunk right there is going to be parallel with my 182 degree line. We also know that those two lines, because I'm about 6-7, I don't know, maybe 8 feet from that tree trunk, that those two parallel lines are also going to be 8 feet apart at distance. And so if my azimuth was aiming me at the right edge of that tree, if we go 8 feet or so to the right that's now pointed more at that little tree. And so that's where we're gonna, or possibly even that tree. So that's where we're gonna focus now. And it's just kind of a small trick, you know, by thinking of your azimuths as parallel lines to each other and just noting the difference in how far apart those two lines are. You know, we don't have to be standing right in the middle of the tree getting stabbed in the face by every branch to shoot the azimuth. Okay guys, made it up to the next point. You can see the tag right there on that tree. That is that little tree on the right. Like I said, when I shot the azimuth at the last tree, it was pointing over here. But I knew that I was also, you know, about 8 feet to the left of the tree trunk where the tag was, and so by compensating back 8 feet or so got me to this tree. Back when I was building this course, I wanted there to be kind of a finale to it. You know, one thing, not only do I want my students when they come out here to learn, I want them to be proud of themselves when they get done. And, you know, this whole, every leg of this land nav course for the most part is on an incline. And so it started on the back side of this hill, circled around, came up over that ridge over here, and now we're going down. I kind of wanted to finish it off with just a nice view so that the students could kind of see what they'd accomplished, the ground they'd covered. And you know, by the time they get here, they've most likely, for the most part, most of them anyways, have learned a new skill. And so, you know, I wanted them to be proud of themselves. Down there's, just to the right of my truck, and that, just to the right of that dead wood actually is where the start point was this morning. You know, my classes, they're not easy classes. I don't make them intentionally hard though. There's no boot camp drill instructor, none of that. You know, out here just hiking around, putting up with the weather and the conditions and the stress and the strain of learning new skills and being in a fairly strange environment. I've found for most of my students, a lot of students have compared the terrain out here to, you know, feeling like they're on the moon or something. So I'm very much about building up my students. Here's one of our targets that we've had up here for quite a few years. She's been shot up quite a bit. AR 500. This is a 2/3 IPSC size silhouette. You can still kind of tell what the paint job used to look like. It was a green and tan camouflage with a AK style silhouette of a rifle on there. Yeah, that's pretty much, I got one more point. It's just down here on this dead tree. Right there. That's the final point. So anyways, if you guys made it through this whole video, I hope that you guys learned a lot. And I hope you had a good time. I hope it was enjoyable. I had fun making it. It's always good to get out and get some exercise and see some wildlife and just be out in nature and recharge. Anyways, thank you all.